Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, good evening, depends when you are listening to this. You're listening to the Fuel Growth Podcast. I'm the host, Phil Seeva, and I'm joined here in the studio. I say studio, we all know it's the office because we've got cameras filming us. Now, last time when we did our podcast, which was about a month ago, I had in the studio with me Martyn King and Steve Geisman. Today, we agreed that we're only going to have one of you guys in going forward. And this time we have Martyn King, not Steve Geisman, we have Martyn King with us. Martyn, hello and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Phil. Good to be selected ahead of Steve for this one.
I think it was more of an alphabetical thing.
Oh, was it?
You know, don't big yourself up about that. Now, what I wanted to do was, obviously we had the podcast last, and that was our first one. It went presumably reasonably well that you've asked to do it again. And we said, let's all do it again, which is great. And we said that you're going to bring in a guest to each show. So this time it's your guest. Next time it will be Steve's guest. We'll have to wait and see who it is. But can you tell us who is your guest today?
Well, I'm very pleased to say my guest today, I thought I'd start with a star. And so my guest today is Ollie Jackman, who is the co-owner of Agile Comms. Who's got a great story to tell as a startup in terms of fueling growth. So
well, Ollie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
You're pleased to be here. We should declare we sort of know you, don't we?
You sort of do, yeah.
We do. We've known you for about 2 years. So 2 years or longer?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. Well, listen, Martyn, thank you for introducing Ollie. Thank you for bringing him along. The reason we thought it would be a good idea is that you've essentially, in that X Factor kind of way, you've been on a journey, we'll call it, and you've been on an interesting journey over the last few years since we met you. And we're keen to find out how that's happened, how it's worked, why you did it, all those sorts of things. We've only got half an hour to deal with it, so we're going to have to deal with it on a top layer. But are you okay with that sort of approach that we take?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, look, why don't we start by give us an overview of what's happened to you in the last 2 years, where you were and where you are now.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So as Martyn said, I'm a co-founder and director at Agile Comms, a telecoms company. We're approaching a year old. So if you rewind to pre-launch, my business partner and I were putting together a plan to create a telecoms company with a difference, a telecoms company that operated a little bit differently to the sort of norm, the prehistoric culture of telecoms, really. And it was when we went for a beer with Fuel that kind of accelerated, and we've been working with them in close partnership ever since. Launched the business in November last year. And
it's going well?
Yeah, it's a big question. People ask us, people ask, how is it going? Quite a lot. And
do you not want people to ask that question?
I like the question, it's fine, but it's also very broad and it depends what mood I'm in, what I've been doing that day, what I'm focused on.
I'm laughing because I ask you that all the time. I'm going to stop asking you that.
Be more specific. So, if we've got our head in finances, I'll be thinking about that. If we've just won a new client or we haven't, I'll be thinking about those things. But as a general overview, the business is going very well.
Thank you. In fact, I'm going to come back to that. But Martyn, you've got something to think about while we're dealing with this, and that is, what role have you guys at Fuel played in supporting their growth? So we're going to come on to that in a moment. But you were saying about finances there, Ollie. Can I just check? Would you say, hand on heart, finances, it's good, it's going in the right direction, you've made the right decision?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's well, I guess it's going to plan. We wrote quite a carefully considered plan. It was a little bit finger in the air because we've not done this before. We didn't know what the appetite would be, but it turns out we were either on the money or we've reached what we were set out to do.
And you presumably, I mean, you touched on this, but you were a company doing something similar, but in on a larger basis.
Yeah,
you've gone off on your own, offering something different.
Yep, James, my business partner, and I have both been in telecoms for 15 plus years. We've worked together in the management team in a well-established business locally, and formed a really close friendship. We're best mates, and we just started talking about, can we do it better ourselves?
I mean, I'm going to ask you a simple question, but I mean, why did you do it?
Martyn asked me that before we launched, and initially it was to...
I appreciate it's a really simplistic question, and there could be loads of different answers, but...
Well, it's changed.
What does your heart tell you? Why did you do it?
It's changed a lot. Initially, it was because I want to retire with bags full of money, and it was fairly,
I love an honest answer,
focused on earning more. And I'm a salesman. So, that's the glass ceiling, breaking through that by starting your own business. And that was pre-launch. But since launch, the learning and development I've done and James have done, and that journey that you talk about, and perhaps the growth that, another part of the growth that we've been on, is all the other stuff that running a business allows you to do. Mm-hmm. So providing an environment that's inclusive, providing a cultural business that people are going to feel comfortable working with, working for, and our goals are now so much wider than earning lots of money.
Yeah.
And that's really gratifying, actually, and it's a really good learning curve to be on.
I mean, look, without putting too fine a point on it, I mean, you have a young family and you made a decision, a brave decision, I have to say, to sort of go off on your own. Most people are quite happy in their normal 9-to-5 job, getting paid at the end of the month. But you presumably said, no, that's not for me. I'm going to go off on my own. I'm scary or not scary?
Yeah, definitely scary. Definitely a bit of a cliff edge.
Did your wife find it scary?
Yeah, for sure. And there was a moment pre-launch where I was pulled over on the side of the road on the phone to my dad, actually, questioning it all. And everyone was a bit terrified that I was about to pull out. But that was only one moment. And that's now part of that. That fear keeps you going a bit, doesn't it, as well? And the hardest bit of the last year has been the money at home has been very different to what it was like while we get this idea off the ground. There's no luxury holidays, there's no fancy stuff, and, we've had to really rein all that in.
Well, here's one for you. Instant reaction. Good decision, bad decision?
The best decision.
That wasn't the option. But yeah, I'll go with that. That's a better option. Now, Martyn, let me bring you back in. What have you guys at Fuel been doing to help them fuel their own growth with this business?
Yeah, I think what's quite interesting is it's amazing what can happen over a beer and a discussion and an ideas sort of. It wasn't an idea session. We were just going for a beer, and you were talking about setting up on your own. And Steve and I actually very quickly thought, Ollie's certainly a guy who's got a great idea there. There's a lot to be said about seeing somebody who could coast along doing what he's doing, or be hungry about taking a risk. I recognise a lot in that. I went off on my own when I was 30 actually, and my youngest daughter was just born. So I do recognise all of those points.
He's paid.
But what was quite interesting, I think for us, was you have to look at personalities, don't you? So Ollie and James do have a really good dynamic, and that was obvious to see. And then timing is a massive thing. Lots has changed in the communications industry, and I think by us getting involved, that we were able to take advantage of the correct timing to go live with Agile, if you like, because the way in which we work, the flexible and hybrid working, threw a lot of balls up in the air. So that's
the luck crucial aspect, isn't it?
And the two things that come out of that I think are really important. I mean, you just mentioned that it's Ollie and James, and you're absolutely right. I mean, my interaction with you, Ollie, and Agile is through you, and I know James less. But that's I instantly think it's about you. I mean, what you've touched on is there's a similarity there between Ollie and James and yourself and Steve, for example. Yeah. And you said that you recognise that and you saw that. Yeah. Be interesting to see which one you think is Steve and which one you think is Martyn. I don't know. Let's not deal with that now. It could get messy. But there are other things as well. Definitely the feeling of maybe slight concern of opening your own business and not necessarily taking a risk. That's a tough thing to do. So you also touched there briefly on what you've actually done to support them. Yeah. Do you want to just run us through, just very briefly, from the inception? I mean, I understand you were involved in the brand and that sort of stuff. Do you want to give us an overview on that?
Yeah, sure. So we latched onto the fact that this was a great idea and of the right time, if you like. And therefore, growth takes many forms and everything else. But I think, we truly believed in what the guys were trying to do. So we made an investment in a minority sense into the business. So that was good because that enabled us to probably bring forward plans.
Yeah, that's the timing comment. it's a lot of aspects to that. That's the good fortune. That's the luck element, I suppose, is that James and I were talking about launching this 6 months later than when we did, because we needed to save up some money to pay our mortgages for the preceding 6 months. And that fatal night where we were having a few beers, you were there. Actually, that's the timing element.
I don't remember it. But no, I did. I mean, I tell you what. The other thing that struck me as interesting there, Martyn. In the old days, marketing agency comes along, helps a business get up out of the ground, out of the foundations, if you like, and gets paid a fee and moves that on. Fuel has changed to such an extent that actually, if you're talking about fueling growth in any business or being a growth partner, you actually, by the sounds of it, saw an opportunity to invest in something. So it's almost as if you've become, yes, we all know you as a marketing agency, but you've become so much more than that. You are a full service agency, but actually you're an investment partner.
Yeah. And we do. I mean, we've done that with another client as well, which has been a really good. I mean, look, if you believe in these things enough, putting your money where your mouth is quite something, isn't it? And I think we've worked with. I was calculating this the other day. We've probably advised about 50 startups.
Right. Okay.
And all of those things, it's very easy to get caught up in the excitement of it all.
Yeah. I mean, it's a sexy sort of.
Yeah.
Everyone's buzzed up about it. It is. I mean, I was at the launch of Agile. And, everyone's talking about it. It's exciting. There's a cake and, it's a big buzzy event, isn't it? But the reality of the situation starts the next day, doesn't it?
But yeah. And I think from our perspective there, we've got much more that we can bring other than, of course, we can do the branding and help with the marketing strategy and plan and stuff. But, there's a lot more sort of pastoral stuff, I guess you can do. I can empathise with Ollie on where he's at, and Ollie and James, it's their business and they run it really well. They've got really professional plans for the business. But I think we're a good sounding board, and that's
again,
that's great.
You've got
too.
experience in that. I mean, you went through what Ollie and James are going through. 10 years ago or whenever it was. So it's about 10 years ago, isn't it? Just over.
Yeah.
I guess so, yes. Now, Ollie, a couple of things I want to ask you in terms of the challenges of the last 2 years, because let's be honest, there were probably better times to start a business, but I suspect that the pandemic has created somewhat of an opportunity in the comms industry. Is that fair with people changing the way they work?
Yep. So it's come up a few times with people. It seems like a mad time for some people. Can't get their head around why start a business in this turbulence. But actually, I think every event, every turbulent moment creates opportunity, and technology, communications have helped businesses work through that. And if anything, we were slightly late to it because we were launching post-pandemic. So we're kind of picking up the businesses that haven't innovated or that are continuing to, rather than those early adopters. So it's a really good time. It's also the business isn't, because of all that development, it's not expensive to run. We're able to launch a business from our offices at home. We don't need staff. We don't need loads of equipment. So the startup costs were pretty insignificant. It's the growth fund that's required, I guess.
So, Ollie, can I just check, in terms of this sort of post-pandemic world that we live in, with people not necessarily going back to work full-time, how is it that Agile can help those businesses? And this is your opportunity, a bit of a plug for the business.
So in my years in communications, it's always been the most joyful part of the job is going into organizations and understanding how they work. But pre-pandemic, it's relatively predictable and samey. And what's been amazing now is to see how that varies and how some people are adopting hybrid working. Some organizations firmly want people back in the office. Obviously, some operations need to be on site and on a production line. But what the pandemic's thrown into the mix is all of those options. And that's very much enabled by technology. So the technology we provide allows people to communicate professionally from anywhere. You can work as a team, you can collaborate, and the benefits of that can be quite significant. You can reduce travel and therefore be more productive, reduce costs. You can also attract and retain staff a lot better from a further catchment area. We've seen some customers get rid of their office altogether, which wasn't unheard of before lockdown, but it was certainly a rarer thing to do. And people are looking at different types of workspace and different ways of working, and individuals and professionals are demanding that more because they know that it's a competitive environment.
And I guess in a way, as much as the pandemic was incredibly difficult for a tremendous amount of people, the reality is, because of the different need for technology going forward, there is an opportunity with a business like yours.
Yeah, and when lockdown happened, everybody rushed to deploy services that were fitting a hole that was upon them, and they didn't necessarily think that through and make that as strategic as it otherwise would have been. And a lot of businesses are still in that position of sort of panic mode, and actually don't step back and consider technology. Yeah. So the opportunity a lot of the time for us is to help them consider the perception it gives. A lot of the time it's about that. It's about how quickly and personably they answer the phone, and how they can communicate best with different people.
I mean, I guess, back in pre-pandemic, some of the remote working was a bit sort of basic and naive, whereas now I imagine that I'm talking to people on the phone and you have no idea where they are, but they feel like they're in the office still. And I guess that's the sort of technology.
And that's what I meant about perception. So even tiny businesses, but everybody wants to present the perception of professionalism. Last week we were dealing with a waste collector who wanted a landline number because he wants to be more professional than all the other waste collectors. And it's a key part of that perception is to have a landline number, present a landline number, little things like that. But that scales right up to the part of that brand of the business is what it feels like and sounds like when you're communicating with them. So,
and I guess in a way, it comes back to that investment. Martin, it sounds like it was a pretty good investment. It might turn out to be. So because of the timing.
Yeah. I think just to add to sort of a couple of points to that. Don't forget, we were all pretty much forced to go and work at home. And so theoretically, that was actually quite easy for Fuel because, we sent the team home and said, work from home and everything else. But our communications infrastructure was set up for sitting in here and transferring calls and stuff. So, you get away with it, if you like. But the calls would come in and they'd probably end up in a bit of a cul-de-sac to begin with on somebody's mobile who sort of, was reluctant or didn't have a company mobile. So we shouldn't be enforcing those things onto our people. So therefore it's about these sort of solutions are great now, aren't they? So we don't have to get people we don't have to supply mobile phones. We can have an app that sits on top of it.
Yeah.
People are really cool with that because they don't want two handsets. There's an environmental point to that as well. Why would you want it? So like a team perception thing is
internal,
really good.
External.
All of a sudden, the internal bit is often underestimated, I think.
The external bit, though, if you phone a potential supplier or somebody you're interested in speaking to in March 2020 and they weren't able to answer, that kind of blitz spirit helped us sort of accommodate that.
Exactly that.
That's
sort of went with it, didn't you?
Ancient history now. The organisations should have moved on, and our impatience.
Just expect now.
Yeah, we're busy. We're working from anywhere, which means we can be more productive. We're expected to be. So everybody's more impatient, and we talked about that at launch, didn't we? That level of impatience now in the competitive environment we're in.
Now, Ollie, I've got a question for you, but I don't want you to answer it now. I want you to answer it at the end. But I'm using it as an opportunity to tee it up to give you some time. I maybe should have mentioned this before. Is there something in the telecommunications industry that you think is going to be very, very big for us that's on the horizon that you think that it's going to blow our minds or it's going to change our lives? But hold on to that thought because you have to think about it, and I appreciate you need some time.
Are you coming to me now to give him some time to think?
I've now realised I'm now going to go back to him anyway because there's a question I want to ask anyway. So I'm not really giving him any time.
Okay.
So the question, we'll move on. We'll come back onto that. But the question for now is, what growth plans have you got for the future?
Right. Well, we're coming up to the end of our first year, so we're going to be doing a big review. And our board is made up of me, James, and usually Martin, but the guys at Fuel, that's part of that agreement is that Martyn's a brilliant mentor for us, and having that on board in our monthly board meetings. And I think that annual review is something I'm personally really excited about. I said earlier that we've gone to plan, which makes me think the next year's plan should probably be more ambitious, because I'd rather set a goal that's hard to hit. But then the other part of me thinks we could continue the stable growth. So that'll be a really interesting discussion to see how we plan the next 12 months, what that means, and how we scale the business up, whether we need a premises and staff and, start to take on some of those burdens.
Although it's a challenge at this stage, it's relatively easier because it's agile. It's small and it can move and it can do anything you want it to be. In the future or going forward, I guess it's going to be harder and, a different set of challenges. Every business has challenges, but this is a different set of challenges for you now.
That agility is lovely with a startup.
Yeah.
And we didn't work for a ginormous business, but there was still red tape and committee decisions and bureaucracy, everything you want to do. And that agility from our process point of view, from our route to market, from everything we do, we've got a blank piece of paper, and sure, sometimes we might sanity check that with each other, but we can make quick decisions, and that's going to change. That's what you're saying. That might dilute a little as the company grows, but I'm desperate to keep hold of it, I think. And there's loads of reasons why we love the name Agile. The name was something I poured over and got quite stressed out about. And
whose idea was it?
Well, Martyn was completely chilled, saying, "We'll come up with a name. Don't worry about it." And for about 2 months, I was like fretting about it because we had this plan. We'd written a business plan for a business without a name, and it was just becoming this big elephant in the room. We'd registered the company. We'd set up a bank account. We were VAT registered. Everything was in motion.
Yeah. I do actually remember a very early stage. You sending me a very small business plan, a very early bit, and it had no name on it.
Yeah.
And and I remember sitting there in Derriford Eye Hospital reading this through one eye going, I'm not sure they're ready for this. But now, Martyn, obviously you guys were involved in the name and the brand. Can you give us a bit of an insight where that comes from? Is that what you do for clients?
Yeah, it's a funny one because I'm definitely patient about it and believe in the process. So we have quite a structured process around getting the right name. I can think of lots of organisations where we've spent a good deal of time on it.
So he's done it loads of times before. That's the difference, I think.
Yeah.
And it's more personal to you, Ollie.
Yeah, so, and the right idea will come along. But it's really important to think very carefully about it and go through the right processes. So we definitely did that. Again, another sort of pub strategy meeting, and nothing come out of that one, did it? Immediately, we had lots of good ideas, and I could see it sort of adding to Ollie's stress a little bit. But we had lots of good ideas, and I come away from that thinking, we're in and around it here. This is pretty good. Ollie's thinking,
I wanted to come out with a bloody name. I wanted to come out with an answer.
Yeah. So, but in fairness, actually, you and James did come up with Agile, didn't you?
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So that wasn't us.
But Martyn,
I've known
you quite a long time. You're fairly relaxed about this sort of stuff, trusting the process. I always think to myself, the time to really panic is if someone like Martyn or Steve panic. Because when they start panicking, it's time to then put your head between your legs and kiss your ass goodbye. Because chances are things are going to go wrong. You are very laid back I guess you're controlled, I would say.
Well, I think look, we've seen it before, and it's much better to spend more time on the right brand and positioning that you're going to live and breathe and everything than let's do something.
Yeah.
Other things about the work we did together instantly came together. Yeah. So the brand, the logo, the colour, the website.
From there, that
just
was seamless,
screamed ahead,
yeah.
And there was a deadline of our launch party that you mentioned with the cake, but actually it didn't feel like that was ever a hard.
So did you actually have a launch party before you had a name?
No, the cake had the name on it.
No, I know that, but when you set the launch party date, did you have a name?
We had a date, yeah.
Right.
We had a date and no name.
We booked the venue because we wanted the launch party to be.
I just got this vision of sort of the cake maker going, quick, I need a name.
It wasn't that.
This is your going in. But no, I love the name, actually, I'll be honest. I think it says so much. One of those, so many names don't really mean anything. But actually that name mean something. Certainly in this market, and considering the market and the change that the industry, the world has been through in the last 2 years, you need something in terms of comms that's agile.
There's a couple of things I really like about it since that we weren't expecting. One is it keeps us accountable to being agile. So for as long as this business is trading, we have to remain agile, which is great. And the other one is when you're speaking to a potential client or somebody, anybody, they start using the word agile loads at you. And you can tell that's when they're kind of buying into the idea. Yeah. Penny drop moments.
But I think significantly, we've not touched upon it. Ollie's industry there is not really or hasn't traditionally been an agile industry. Right, yeah, it is. Right. Here's a really nice piece of kit on a 7-year contract.
Yes,
the world's
which
moved
is the opposite of agile.
The world's moved on from that,
yeah.
and I think that was the key insight there, mate, wasn't it? To get the.
Well, Ollie, I mean, I've given you a little bit of time now. Have you got anything for us that we can expect down the future? Are we going to be wearing microchips that we can just talk to each other? Come on, give us something.
Well, it's a bit geeky and dull, I think.
No, it never is.
At the end of 25, the BT are decommissioning all of the copper infrastructure.
Oh,
and in my mind, the telecoms industry has been talking about it for years, and it's like banging the same old drum. But I think actually, as a general public, don't know enough about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite a big deal, isn't it?
Yeah, there's millions of copper lines still in service throughout the UK, and on paper, in theory, at the moment, they're all going to be decommissioned in December 25, which means everybody will have to have an alternative way to make and take calls and connect to the internet, i.e. fibre and SIP and VoIP and all those buzzwords and acronyms that we talk about.
I mean, that's actually bigger than people think, really.
Well,
it's the way it's always been done.
Yeah.
And I know it's starting to change, but if you turned it off tomorrow, for example, millions of people are stuffed.
And if there's not a readiness for that, I know December 2025 still feels like a long time away, but actually there's millions of circuits out there, and there'll be a queue of people at the 11th hour. My cynical mind is, well, you don't want to be part of that queue if you can avoid it. And actually, the right type of companies are innovating in those ways anyway, so it won't be a challenge for them. But my cynical mind does also say they'll probably delay it. DAB radio never actually, FM radio, never really got decommissioned when DAB, as it was supposed to.
They just charged you an absolute fortune for a new license on FM.
Yeah,
which meant you had to go DAB. So you didn't have
and
a choice.
It feels like that kind of thing. But that's a bit dull, I suppose, from a kind of more attractive, innovative point of view. I just think things are going to get more mobile, more portable. Yeah. Working life is going to carry on in that trajectory. We're going to be collaborating further afield. It opens up new markets, new opportunities.
And if you are going to work from home, people, don't post pictures on your social media at you at the beach. Your boss sees it. It never works. It always goes wrong. Now, listen, we're approaching our time, at the end of our time together at the Fuel and Growth podcast. And I think it's only fair to say, Ollie, thank you very much for coming in. Also, thank you very much for telling your story in such a candid way, because, look, when you start a business, it's not always easy. And there's no point in sugarcoating it. And I love the fact that you talked about, a little bit of stress at home with you don't quite know what you're going to get into. I'm glad you're through that. I'm glad you're out of it. So thank you very much for coming to see us at this podcast. Martyn, it's always a pleasure. I won't see you at the next one. I presume I will have Mr. Geisman with me.
I don't think we've got that far forward. No. We've got a great big list of people we want to bring in terms of different stages in their growth. So yeah, it might be Steve, but it might be me.
Well, who knows? Well, guys, thank you very much for coming into the podcast. Always a pleasure to see both of you on a personal level, and I shall hopefully see you all very, very soon.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you.